it's not the first time you've been asked for the Crossing Border Festival. You've been asked before. What made you decide to come this year?
It's a matter of convenience, really, I have to be honest, and say that if I'm out on the road touring my material, I will be open to these kind of propositions. But if I'm not out on the road performing material, it is a massive commitment to move away from anything that I'm currently working on, to rehearse material, to come out and perform maybe for just one or two shows. As long as it coincides with material I'm currently working on tour, then I'm happy to get involved in festivals of this kind.
Well, what do you think of the Crossing Border Festival? Because it's a mixture of literature and music.
I think it's an interesting mix, and I like when we get to cross over in this fashion from one medium to another, and literature particularly. I mean, I'm fascinated with literature and have a love of literature, of poetry particularly. So I think it is a wonderful festival in that it embraces these disciplines, you know.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to do something special tomorrow night?
Well, it's a continuation of the tour that I did of Europe, which ended about 2.5 weeks ago. So this is like a footnote to that concert tour, which is basically centered around the album Blemish. We played Blemish in its entirety as an opener, followed by an acoustic set, followed by a third portion of the show, which is primarily new material again.
Talking about literature, is there something of any interest which will be on the Crossing Border Festival?
I can't say. I've yet to look at the schedule and see who's on, and so I don't know at this point in time.
What is the last thing you've read?
Atomized by Michel Houellebecq, and I thought that was an amazing book.
Holger Tsukai is one of the performers on tomorrow night also. Are you planning something together?
You know, I didn't know Holger was on the same bill until...
You didn't know?
No, not until yesterday. I tend to live in ignorance when I travel, when I tour. I don't really know which town I'm going to next. It's a wonderful ignorance that I indulge in when touring, because these considerations are taken care for you. And it's the only time in life that I'm able to live and breathe in that kind of... innocence, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. My days are planned for me, but I don't want to look too far ahead and see just where it is I've got to go on the map. I just take it on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. I honestly don't know which is the next town I'll be playing in, and what are the circumstances of that performance. And I find that more intriguing than seeing it laid out on some kind of itinerary.
Now you know, Holger Tsukai is tomorrow on the set list. Maybe something together then? Possibly.
I have yet to see Holger, but you know, when we hook up, maybe we can talk about what is possible. But I don't know what kind of material he's performing. So I don't know if he's giving a speech, or a talk, or working with film, visuals, or is it?
He's going to do a concert with Alan Warner, the writer.
Ah, right. Well, that'll be interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see.
The show will not be a best-of show.
No, I toured about 2 years ago in support of the Everything and Nothing compilation album, which was the last album I put together for Virgin Records before parting ways with them. And that tour was primarily focused on retrospective material, and I focused on the older material for a number of years, putting together these compilations for Virgin, and I felt it a rather... On one level it was satisfying. I got to tie up a lot of loose ends. On another level it was creatively stifling, and I have no desire currently to go back and revisit that material. It was quite difficult trying to decide which of the older material I would perform, and I tried to settle on pieces that hadn't been overperformed in the past, that I hadn't had to focus on in recent years. And so there's very little old material, just 1 or 2 or 3 pieces in the set that dip back into the catalogue, if you like. There's a wealth of new material, which is challenging for an audience, and Blemish itself is quite a challenging album, and then to present the audience on top of that with yet more new material, I do realize it's asking a lot of the audiences that we've performed to, but there's been an enormous amount of generosity on the part of the audiences wherever we've played. And for that I've been truly grateful, because it's obvious, people want to hear something they're familiar with, but they've allowed me to take them on a journey and sort of if you know, and been open to it. I guess it's that degree of openness, that generosity of spirit, as I said, and I'm truly grateful for that.
Talking about blemish, the first time I heard it, I thought it was rather difficult, not very easy listening.
It wasn't designed to be easy, but it was an attempt to create a new vocabulary of sorts. I'd grown tired of my own stylistic trappings in my own writing, and I'd grown tired of particular forms of music that no longer seemed to have the same currency that they once did. So how to go about dealing with very difficult subject matter in terms of dealing with emotional issues that we tend to want to look away from in life, how to deal with that in composition, and try to create new and valid forms for it. So in a sense it had that shock of the new, that freshness about it, rather than giving us a false sense of security, which a lot of familiar forms tend to do. You know, so it was trying to break away from that and try and find a form of music that had a greater potency, for want of a better word.
It sounds fresh, but also dark and bitter.
Well, it deals with, as I said, difficult subject matter, and as I said before, these are emotions that we tend to want to look away from in life rather than focus on. And I'm the same. I tended to look away from them in life, but in the studio, once I closed that door on the world, I felt it was an interesting discipline to go further into these emotions, go beyond, you know, as deeply as I could into them. It felt safe to be able to do that in that environment, and really explore them and find a language, a vocabulary that expressed these feelings at this moment in time, that I felt that I could relate to, that had a power and an emotional jolt, if you like. I mean, I don't think the album is difficult listening sonically. It's more so the subject matter and the angular nature of some of the pieces, some of the compositions. But it was a matter of trying to find that form, trying to find something that really worked for me, and also working with improvisation, which generally the whole album is based around improvised performances. So there's this immediacy to the album. Each piece was instigated by a guitar performance, either by myself or Derek Bailey, and the second step was to sit back and listen to that initial take and immediately start writing down the first things that came into mind, and then follow that through with melody, and within a matter of hours the vocal would be recorded. Very little time for reflection. What is this about? You know, is it okay to be this vulnerable in one's own work and all the rest of it? These are the considerations that come after the fact. So it was a discipline just to go with this kind of approach, to allow myself to stand so naked in my own work, and in a sense to relish that, to relish the rawness, the honesty and the truthfulness, and in a sense what I was discovering was this, as I said, new vocabulary, both as compositionally and lyrically, that would carry the pieces. The
album is about the breakup of your relationship. It ends with a fire in the forest, and that sounds hopeful.
I guess I'm an optimistic person in that respect. Yeah, I mean, there's always hope. I think, you know, I have certain disciplines that help guide me through my life, spiritual teachers and all the rest of it. I've always felt that to really undertake some kind of spiritual journey was to face all of the negatives as well as the positive aspects of life. And having that kind of background allowed me to delve very deeply into the darker side of my own nature and pull out and hold a mirror up to what was there. So I feel stronger for being able to do that. You know, I don't think I could necessarily have done it at any other point in my life, particularly as I was in the midst of the experiences myself. They hadn't been resolved. But having come through the album, the writing of it and the recording of it, I wrote Fire in the Forest. It was the last piece to be written for the album. And I think because the process of recording the album was very cathartic for me, I felt a release, and I felt a possibility for resolution, for some kind of hope, possibility for the future, and that song seems to allude to that.
Have the problems resolved?
I can't really talk about the personal aspect of what went on in my life and what has or hasn't been resolved, but I certainly became a stronger person for allowing myself to go that much further into my own emotional landscape, if you like, and explore it 100%. I felt a much stronger person as a result of the work, as a result of the experience of creating the work, and it gave me a strength, and it gave me an insight, and that's very, very valuable.
Hinduism plays a big part in your life. Why?
The notion of some kind of spiritual journey has fascinated me for a large part of my life, and over the years I've dipped into different kind of disciplines to see what would work for me and how I could grow and develop in that respect. I had an attachment to Buddhism for many years, for example, and but I never actually went out and sought a teacher of any kind. I tried to work my way through certain disciplines through reading and personal experience, and it took me so far, but I reached some kind of, the practice became very dry, and there was no inspiration to continue it. So I felt this was some kind of crisis, and I needed to overcome this hurdle, and maybe the best way to do it would be to find a teacher. And it just so happened that I ended up coming to teachers that were from India, from a Hindu background. And finally I embraced a teacher who I immediately recognized as my guru, and her whole background is Hindu based. It's not that was necessarily something I had to personally embrace, but I've made a connection with it that seemed valid, and I decided to follow that through. So my practice embraces aspects of Hinduism and still embraces some aspects of Buddhism. But it's a personal journey. It's whatever works for you, really, whatever benefits you and helps you to move on, making some kind of progress, in spiritual. I don't like the word growth, because it's certainly not a linear journey. But there has to be evidence of development, of reaching some kind of plateau where you can see that, yes, I've come this far, and although there is every opportunity you can slip back to where you previously stood, right now you're standing on this plateau and you can understand how you got there, and you could work your way back to that point in time should anything happen to bring you, in reverse. And also therefore to move on, potentially move on. And it's important for me to be able to see that kind of growth, growth in awareness, growth in consciousness, that helps me to understand and embrace life on a series of different levels, and to see the ego weakened, or to see the mind broadened.
Isn't it strange to depend on a guru?
The guru is just an extension of our greater selves. I mean, if there is a divine mind, then we're all part of this divine mind. All the guru is the divine mind embodied in human form. So if you bow down to a guru, you're bowing down to your higher self. And if somebody has moved from A to B, and it's a journey you have yet to undertake, in every other aspect of life we would say, well, there is a teacher, that person has the knowledge, we will go to them and try to understand how they got from A to B, and they could show us a map, or they could, we could read the manual or whatever. But when it comes to spirituality, there's a sort of general level of suspicion, like, well, who is this person, and how can we trust in this person to lead us from A to B? It's such a vast unknown quantity, So that takes a certain amount of faith and recognition that this person is right for you. But it is a path, it is a journey, and if somebody has undertaken that journey and knows how to help you get to the next level, the next step, and ultimately take you all the way, why aren't you going to take it? That's the bigger issue for me. To turn away would be an enormous cowardice.
what can we expect of you in the future?
I put together Samadhi Sound, which is my own label, and I built a studio in America on the East Coast, and so I'm just trying to find my way with that right now in terms of what does it signify and what is its potential. Blemish was the first release on Samadhi Sound. Initially I thought that it would be a record that would get very little recognition, and that maybe just a core group of my audience would try and seek it out. So we were just going to release it on the internet and see how that went, and try to understand my place in the industry, so to speak. But it got an enormously positive response critically, and that brought a lot more attention to the record than we had anticipated. And so the label itself has been growing in leaps and bounds on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, which is something of a learning curve for all of us involved in it. But it's been a wonderfully creative learning curve, and this kind of free-flowing of energy, even in business, which I'm not used to working with major labels. I'm used to coming up against walls of opposition. So it's been quite exciting. So the next step is really to continue recording my own material. I'm also working on a project with my brother, Steve Jansen, and looking to other artists to potentially bring on board, try and create some kind of family, of artists that will become a part of Samadhi Sound for the foreseeable future, to nurture them, to give them time. I think this industry doesn't allow artists time in the way that it once used to. Because if we're really going to forged into new territories in music, for example, and all of the arts, we need time. We need time to take wrong turns. We need time to fail and recover, see where we went wrong and push forward. And I want to be able to afford that luxury of time to other artists so that we can hear new music, something fresh, new vocabularies.
When can we expect a new album?
Something will surface next year for sure. Whether it's my solo album or whether it's the album I'm currently working on with Steve, I can't say right now. I'm hoping Steve will also produce his first solo album, which again I hope will be released next year.
Something completely different, the war in Iraq. You stood up against it this year. I didn't know you were in politics.
Not in politics, and I try to avoid bringing politics overtly into my own work. I don't think that music is best served as some kind of soapbox. I really don't find that to be the most valuable use purpose of music. I think it has far greater potential than that. But I live in America, and Ryuichi Sakamoto lives in America, and we've had a lot of trouble living with this particular administration's policies, and we've seen there to be very few dissenting voices in America. It's a struggle to be heard, and those that are heard are persecuted in some way. So it was just a matter of wanting to say something about the situation. Initial invitation came from Ryuichi. He was writing a piece and asked if I'd write a overtly political lyric for the composition that he was working on, and I initially turned him down. I felt I was the wrong person for the job. But after a period of time, I came up with an idea, and I wrote the song in its entirety and sent it to him, and that sort of got the ball rolling, and we sort of followed it on from there. We now have two pieces, but named World Citizen, which take on the notion of global responsibility, from slightly different perspectives. One's very overtly political, one less so. But it felt necessary. And living in America, you can't help but feel it's necessary to speak out against what this current administration is doing, the way it is acting in the world. It's just absolutely frightening.
You were thinking of quitting the music some time ago. You have so devoted fans that I don't understand why you should quit music.
Well, you have to follow what feels right in your heart at any point in time. At the time I was really believing that to be a possibility. I was working on an album called Dead Bees on a Cake, and I was having a lot of problems completing the album. It seemed no matter which way I turned, obstacles were arising to its completion. And I began to think, well, maybe this is it. Maybe it's just never going to be completed. And if I took that idea on board, that meant that I would no longer have the support that I once had. And I was very, very heavily immersed in following my teachers at that point in time. and beginning to feel greater and greater rewards in my spiritual life. And I thought, well, maybe I should devote myself entirely to that path. And I spoke to two of my teachers who basically, gave me a kick up the arse and said, get back out in the world and work and make it. Because your work is a very much important part of your growth, And to me, that's what it is. I mean, I was able to go back to the work and embrace it with wholeheartedly, knowing it's the right thing to do, that I should be doing it. And I was able to complete the album and see it through, and I'll go back to work with a sense of renewed passion and sense of possibility, and embrace the obstacles too. I think that's important. Always be able to embrace the positive and the negative, and don't differentiate. It's all part of the learning process, and whatever you're given is what you now have to overcome and understand and learn from. So whether I go through a very what we term negative experience in life, whether it's in my emotional life or my working life, or positive experiences, I try not to differentiate and just say, well, this is it. This is the next thing I have to go through. This is the next thing I have to learn from. And what is it? What is it I have to recognize about this, that I don't keep repeating these patterns over and over again, that I can be liberated from this cycle and move on to the next. And that's fascinating. Yeah.
Is there an ending of the learning process?
No, I think it's never ending.